My talk today is a little bit unusual because it is something that the UUA wanted all congregations to do. Granted, not quite in their time frame, but I got there. It is called The Promise and Practice of Our Faith Through Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And it's a campaign that the UUA has instituted. The UUA says this is our opportunity to take the lead as a faith denomination in addressing our history of upholding white supremacy. Together, we can collectively work to dismantle it and amend a long broken promise to the black lives that are within our association. Let's join our Association of Congregations as we do something different in this extraordinary moment with our theological values as we enter a new chapter within our faith. The congregations were asked to schedule at least one Sunday to give this presentation, but also are asking congregations to make a financial commitment in our support of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism that is transformational and inspirational. There is a $1 million match opportunity. If our donations rise to the level of $10 per member, they will be matched at the UUA level through a generous grant from members of the UU congregation. Not our congregation, but a congregation. But part of what they asked us to do is to pull for this talk from the resources that they have provided and not necessarily inject my own personal voice. Today you are going to hear words that were written and produced by people of color in the Unitarian Universalist home. What is this promise and practice? It is a turning moment, a choice to listen deeply to the stories in our movement that have not been heard and taken to heart by all Unitarian Universalists. It's a lamenting of what our Unitarian Universalist traditions and congregations have lost by being unable or unwilling to center people of color, or even at times to merely include them. The promise and practice is a celebration of our shared commitment to live in a new chapter in the story of our UU faith. So by promoting this event, it is the intention of creating a soul-deep space of feeling and experiencing the power of this moment in our UU story. These are the voices and stories of UUs of color inviting us to bear witness to the pain as a place of connection, recognizing all that's been lost in our tradition. This is intended to be an embodied participatory movement of healing as a symbolic turning from the past to the future. So, our service this morning asked us to humbly and perhaps with some discomfort listen to the lived reality of Unitarian Universalists of color. The discomfort is both a gesture of hospitality to voices that have not been heard enough and a sign that we are growing in the right direction. We who are Unitarian Universalists often choose to make ourselves uncomfortable in the service of our meaning making. We recognize our discomfort as evidence that we're growing. Today, if you feel discomfort arise within you, especially if you are white, we invite you to practice being curious and to allow your discomfort to lead you to new learning. We are here today because we are mindful of our past and because we have hope for the future. The following personal reflections are offered from the perspective of Unitarian Universalists of color who have struggled to find belonging in our movement or who have been disappointed and hurt by our UU people of faith. The first one is from a reflection from Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout. He's a director of worship and music at the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Ann Arbor, Michigan. His reflection, since he is a music minister, is on one of our hymns, which is an African spiritual, number 95, called There Is More Love Somewhere. And it's really a simple tune. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm going to keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There's more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm going to keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There's more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. Where? Last summer at the General Assembly, I walked out at, this is Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout. Last summer at General Assembly, I walked out of the sanctuary we had made from the convention center space. As tired as I was, I returned more and more to my deeply introverted default of self. And I passed a woman who had to stop to talk with me. Many religious professionals who have led a morning worship service know this is where the work begins. She walked up to me and said, "Dr. Rideout." Because she had enough grace to remind me of my title, she gave me the opportunity to resume my church face and posture. She held my hands as if we had known each other for the longest time. She looked into his eyes, and she said, "You know what? I always sing that song. There is more love right here. There is more love right here. I'm going to keep on because I found it. There is more love right here." I don't understand why it is that we don't sing that here at GA. We've already found a community of love. And because she had enough compassion and grace to call me Dr. Rideout, she had given me enough time and opportunity to summon up a bit of stillness from the weary remnants of my churchman's posture. She looked into my eyes and spoke and sang to me with her own truth. She asked with genuine curiosity why it is we don't all sing the words that she had come to know. He said, "I was compelled to respond to the woman I had just met with. Thank you for trusting me with that question." And I explained to her why I thought it was necessary, particularly with the music of people of color, that we enter and examine these songs with more curiosity than colonization. I thanked her and I explained that for those of us who live with the privilege of knowing love, it can be difficult to understand the perspective of one who lives without such a privilege. I explained that it can be difficult to understand the lived experience of those who have trouble finding the evidence of love in their immediate vicinity, in their church, in their neighborhood, in their city, in their nation, even in their planet. I thanked her and I explained that for some who don't share the privilege of perceiving love, right here, moving toward that idea of privilege had become a vital practice of Black faith. I offered that if we as a spiritual community of Unitarian Universalists, populated by well-meaning people, are to mean anything to the lives and deaths of people of color, we must begin by learning, not squelching, the forms of expression that arise from these living perspectives. And she said, "Thank you. I've never heard it expressed that way. I never understood it that way. And I will never sing it that same way again." When we inhabit the music, the forms of expression of people who live their lives along the margins of notice, we must notice that we have entered holy ground, a sacred space of learning, a sacred space of relationship. The next reflection is called A Parable on Privilege by Duro K. Farrar, who is a director of music, again, at the First Unitarian Church, this time of Portland, Oregon. He's a member of the board and conference planning committee of the Musicians Network. And before moving to Portland, he led UU congregations in Santa Monica and Los Angeles, led an interfaith community gospel choir, worked as a freelance music director, a vocal contractor and consultant and arranger, and he worked on HBO's All the Way and Jordan Peele's Get Out, just to know where he's coming from. Duro K. Farrar. When I was in middle school, I was taught that every person, to some extent, holds a set of prejudices that impact our perception of others. We were asked to think about what our prejudice might be, how they might inform our relationships and our movement through the world. I knew immediately that my bias was against wealthy people. I said was, but really it's a prejudice I cling to even today. As a private school teacher who became an arts administrator, who became an opera singer, who became a music director for choir and theater, who found his way into a Unitarian Universalist context, I recognize that wealthy people have funded my entire adult existence. My career has taught me to curb my lack of enthusiasm for the rich in support of the greater goal of professional success. My prejudice against the wealthy stems in part from the fact that I've never been wealthy myself. Every person in my family has had to work extremely hard to earn and save every dollar they ever had. And I am certain that if I ever became wealthy, my feelings would likely shift. I am a church musician for a living, however, so wealth is not a prospect I can expect to ever experience. Beyond those reasons for this prejudice of mine, I'm also troubled by some of the ethics around wealth. There is a story in the Christian Bible that I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's recorded in the 19th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew, and it kind of goes like this. A young rich man approaches Jesus and asks what he can do to help bring about the beloved community. Jesus replies by pretty much telling the man to go do all the right things, treat people well, and spread love. The young man says that he's already doing all those things, to which Jesus responds, then go sell all your stuff and give your money to those who have less of it. As the story goes, the rich man went away in deep despair. It does not tell us what decisions he made, but I'm willing to bet he held on to his wealth. This is the story that leads up to the famous passage that warns it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for the wealthy to participate in activating the beloved community. In the innermost part of my being, I believe that it is unethical to be wealthy in a society where there is also poverty. My sensible self, however, recognizes that there is a lack of justice in that conclusion too. There is nothing inherently wrong with being rich, and an argument can probably be made that there's nothing inherently wrong with not sharing one's wealth, unless, of course, you're a Christian, in which case your faith demands it of you. No, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of money. Trouble comes in how we manage the power it gives us. The trouble comes in how we use that wealth and power, through both action and inaction, to stifle the lives of those who have none. By now, I'm sure you think I've forgotten I'm offering these reflections in a service dedicated to examining institutional white supremacy. Here, try this. For decades, we've been preaching the message of how inequality and injustice are pervasive in our Unitarian Universalist systems and institutions. Every time there's a resurgence of energy from the well-meaning white liberals who comprise the bulk of this faith, they say, we get it now. We finally see it. What can we do to help? More often than not, those of us doing the preaching, those of us willing to be caught in the middle of this hopeless mess, steadfastly clinging to hope, respond with instructions, which books and articles to read, which classes, workshops, and rallies to attend, encouragement to recognize one's own privilege. We offer reminders that the beginning of dismantling the unfair systems of white supremacy is in learning to recognize the points of privilege within one's own life. All of that is true, but it's also weak. So well-meaning, white liberals come back and say, great, we've been doing that, and we've learned a whole lot, but we still feel like unintentional racists. What can we do? This is where we, those who bear the burden of teaching, too often respond with something like, well done, good and faithful social justice advocate. Go and tell everyone you know of what you learned. So our well-intentioned siblings in faith do that and feel good about it. Yet racism persists, and a decade later, those same people are confused about what they missed the last time. Here's what we should be saying. Denounce all of your privilege and give it to those with none. Talk about an action item. I guarantee that would get folks' attention. Sadly, it will likely also mean they will go away deep in despair, doing nothing at all. I believe, however, that we do not talk explicitly enough about the fact that every person's privilege is tied to our corrupted system of capitalism. This is true in our country, and it's also true in our Unitarian Universalist congregations. For a person to denounce their privilege, they would have to be willing to give up all that they have mythically come to believe they have earned. If we're serious about dismantling the idea that white people are better than others, it means white people have to stop accepting better salaries and benefit packages than their colleagues of color. It means preaching about living within your means instead of below them, to stop spending less money than one can afford to because our money has an impact on others. It means preaching against unethical gentrification. It means white people finally believing they should not have everything they want just because they are able to access it through use of their inherited social capital. Look, as a black man, white people often frustrate me. There's nothing inherently wrong with being white. And if you ask me, there's nothing inherently wrong with lacking racial diversity. That is, unless you're a Unitarian Universalist and your faith demands it of you. The problem is around the ethics of whiteness, how white people manage the power they have claimed. The trouble comes in how that privilege and power are used to stifle the lives of those who have none. This moment in our tradition calls for both introspection and a change for bold commitment. Oh, and a charge for bold commitment. We have practiced hope, we have practiced making promises. Now we must promise action. The third reflection is from Connie Simon, who's an intern minister at the Unitarian Society of Germantown and contract chaplain at Einstein Medical Center in Philadelphia. Following graduation from Meadville Lombard Theological School in 2018, she intends to pursue parish ministry. Her reflection is called Missing Voices. When I started attending a uni church, I was excited by the promise of worship that would draw from the arts, science, nature, literature, and a multitude of voices. Indeed, some of the voices that Unitarian Universalists hear and worship each week belong to Thoreau, Emerson, Ballou, and others. Their words are beautiful, but they come from a culture and experience that's foreign to me. When do I get to hear voices from my culture? I quickly learned that other than the same few quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Howard Thurman's The Work of Christmas, it wasn't going to happen. I sit attentively and listen with my head to their voices, while my heart longs to hear more of our voices. I am a black woman. When I look around on Sunday morning, I don't see many people who look like me. In most of the congregations I visit, I don't see anybody who looks like me. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised I don't hear voices of people who share my experience, but it still hurts. I want to hear voices that tell the struggle of living under the weight of oppression in this culture of white supremacy. I want to hear stories of trying to stay afloat in the water we swim in. I want to hear voices of living while black in America. I don't hear those voices in UU churches, so I have to supplement my worship by reading black theologians like Anthony Pinn and Monica Coleman. I read Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, and my favorite poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar. Though not a Unitarian or a Universalist, Dunbar chronicled the African American experience in the years following the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved Africans. A time of opportunities for blacks as we migrated north in droves seeking employment and education, but also a time of continuing segregation, racism, and oppression. Dunbar acknowledged this tension in his writing. We hear him long for joy and prosperity, while at the same time knowing that the system would conspire to keep true happiness just beyond his grasp. A pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double, and that is life. Still, he was a champion of social justice, believing that God has sympathy for the plight of the oppressed, and that his grace will be bestowed not on those who soar, but they who plod their rugged way unhelped to God. For Dunbar, the struggle was real. 100 years later, hearing Dunbar express his frustration and give voice to the contradictions of our existence as African Americans encourages me and nourishes my soul. His voice speaks to my heart. He knows my pain and understands my sadness, my fear, and my rage. He understands the tears I cry as I pray for strength to get through another day in this world. He gives voice to my deep faith that real change is coming someday. He didn't see it in his lifetime, and I might not see it in mine, but I have to keep believing it's possible. That's the message many African Americans long to hear in church. I know that's what I need to hear every now and then. Will it ever happen? Or will we always have to go outside to hear our voices? If that's the case, maybe there's no place for us in Unitarian Universalism. The thought of leaving is painful, but so is being in a faith that ignores our voices. The fourth reflection is by Carol Thomas Sissel. She's a reverend and is the settled minister of the UU Fellowship of Center County in State College, Pennsylvania. She collects masterworks of both Native American and First Nations peoples, contemporary art glass, and kisses from her delicious grandson, Andrew. Words matter is the topic of her reflection. Diverse, multicultural, inclusive, welcoming. If I made a list of every single Unitarian Universalist congregation I have served, visited, or worshiped at, they would have a few things in common, including the use of these words. Perhaps on the front of the order of service, or scrolling across the homepage of their website. Maybe they've been emblazoned on a rainbow-colored banner hanging in the sanctuary. Wherever they are, more often than not, the words are proudly combined with another expression that has been embraced in every UU vernacular. All are welcome here. The congregations, churches, and fellowships on my list all have one or more of these words proudly on display. I know why they are used so freely. Initially, I feel embraced by them. There is a warmth of recognition when my eyes first capture their sight. A sense of being acknowledged and valued moves from heart to head, and then a smile settles on my lips. My heart blooms. I feel like the welcome table has been set for me, and I am eager to pull up a chair. All of this takes place in an unmeasurable instant. In the next moment, it is tempered. I remember past experiences and unconsciously recalculate and measure my response. The petals of my heart close a bit, protecting the delicate stigma and stamen that lie within. Fear of disappointment rises within me like the sun. I love those words. I want what they promise, but I have been repeatedly disappointed. It is simply not enough to print them on an order of service or in a newsletter. They must have meaning and intention at their core. A desire for multicultural worship is wonderful, but it will not flower if that seed of yearning is not nurtured by a commitment and a plan. Longing for diversity of race, gender, or age is only a beginning. It calls for caring and creative programming. Our congregations are primarily white, female, and over 60. If we are to serve into the future, that must change. I believe that we can transform first ourselves, then the world. I am injured repeatedly when we do not. When we use words just for the sake of using them, I am hurt. Without the true resolve, planning, and measurable goals behind the things I see, my trust and hope are broken anew. Why does it hurt? Every time I see those words, I feel the possible revival of Unitarian Universalism germinating in the warm soil of spirit. I've seen the transformation begin to take place in Washington State, Washington, D.C., and California. Congregations in Oklahoma continue to push our faith forward. So yes, I am hopeful but wary. On too many occasions and in too many places, these words and the ideals which they carry are given lip service. Words matter. They lift and hold us. They illuminate the future and shower us with possibilities. When misused, they hurt. Verbal cuts and abrasions sting. Language leaves wounds that become scars. Words matter. If you and your congregation are not ready to meet the promises you craft and then share with the world, stop publishing them. Please don't invite me to sit at your table unless you have a warm, satisfying meal to serve. It doesn't have to be a gourmet feast. A potluck is fine. The souffle may only have risen halfway. The cookies might be burned on the edges. The pasta can be overcooked. That's okay. I'm starving. What it must be is full-filling, real, made with love, and ready to be eaten. Remember, I believe what you say and write. Words matter. And the last reflection I have is on a poem by Barbara Holmes. The reflection is by Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson, a minister of the UU congregation of South Fork in Bridgehampton, New York. Among her specialties are anti-racism and youth ministry. The poem by Barbara A. Holmes goes, "Joy unspeakable is not silent. It moans, hums, and bends to the rhythm of a dancing universe. For our free African ancestors, joy unspeakable is drum talk. For enslaved Africans during the Middle Passage, joy unspeakable is the surprise of living one more day. For Africans in bondage in the Americas, joy unspeakable is the moment of mystical encounter when God tiptoes into the hush arbor. Joy unspeakable is humming How I Got Over after swimming safely to the other shore of a swollen Ohio River when you know that you can't swim." When theologian Barbara A. Holmes talks about joy unspeakable, she's talking specifically about how the contemplative practices of the Black church have sustained Black people in America through suffering and survival. More than referring to a particular church or denomination, this experience is collective and transhistorical. It's also a different expression of Black religion than I'm expected to exhibit as a Black woman. On more than one occasion, I've had a particular mode of Black worship projected onto me, the more charismatic modes of Black worship that we're so familiar with, the shout, the stomp, the song. That particular style of Black worship sometimes strikes me as a caricature of joy, a shallow stereotype. I see this in the expectation that more, quote, Black worship will bring more lively singing, more rhythmic clapping, more energetic worship. I see this in the anxiety that more Black worship will bring more lively singing, rhythmic clapping, energetic worship. The shout, the stomp, the song, but this caricature, the stereotype, is a narrow sliver of the complexity and the richness of Black spirituality and Black worship. The modes of Black spirituality that are most powerful, nourishing, and nurturing for me aren't the stomp, shout, or song. Instead, I think of the rock, the sway, the bend, the moan, the hum, and I think of these things done in community. I marvel that in the midst of sadness and sorrow, in the midst of feeling the effects of generations of trauma wrought by racism and white supremacy, we can still find joy with each other. We are finding joy in each other. I call it Black joy because I am Black, and it is the joy that I have been familiar with my whole life. It is the joy that I have learned from Black people. It is the joy created through our collective healing, our laying down of burdens to be picked up and shared by our people, our community. This is not joy in spite of suffering, a mask put on to hide pain, and armor to push on, to push through pain. This is an embrace, holding and soothing us in our suffering. This Black joy is created through our being together. This Black joy reminds me that I am not alone, that trouble don't last always, that I am held and carried forward by a power beyond what I can comprehend. I call it Black joy, but I want to offer it to the extent it is mine to offer to this faith. One of my gifts to Unitarian Universalism is a suggestion that joy is ours. We are the people who commit to justice, equity, and compassion. We are the people who aspire to world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We are the people who affirm our interdependence with each other and the universe itself. I want to challenge Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalists to claim joy. Unitarian Universalist joy will require a different way of imagining ourselves and a different way of being with each other. Claiming the possibility of Unitarian Universalist joy requires making space for the surprise that Holmes describes. Claiming the possibility of Unitarian Universalist joy requires slowing down to hear the talk of the drum, pausing to move to the rhythms of the drum. Unitarian Universalist joy requires opening to the possibility of the mystical encounter. Unitarian Universalist joy requires embodying this faith differently than many of us are accustomed to. Now, I am going to read to you an appeal, and it's directly the words of the UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, and Lena Gardner, the executive director of the Black Lives of UU. And this is it. Every day in our world, people are feeling vulnerable, frightened, and heartbroken. For those of us who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, the effects of racism and oppression are an everyday lived reality, and these feelings are not new. For others, this can be a time of hard awakening to the realities that have existed for a long time, and to new and heightened racial violence and policies targeting the most vulnerable. For all of us, the call of this moment is real. And as Unitarian Universalists, we are invited and challenged every day to live more deeply into our faith. And every day, our people, our congregations, you are responding to that invitation. We're learning to live with a vision of the beloved community in the face of white supremacy and fear. We are learning to confront these things in our own hearts, lives, and congregations. If we, as UUs, are going to be ready to meet the challenge and accept our invitation to build a new way, we must do it together. We know that, as June Jordan said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism is one of the most exciting ways our faith is answering this call. As a national ministry for and by Black-identified Unitarian Universalists, BLUU embodies a liberating community of all ages, a community that lifts up the lives and stories and the leadership of those who have been marginalized and silenced, a community that brings hope, and when hope is hard to find, a community that calls us to wrestle with the gap between our theology and our practice in the world. Today we're asking you to join us in fulfilling that promise. We need your help. The Unitarian Universalist Association has set aside $1 million from its endowment. Two very generous Unitarian Universalists, Julie and Brad Bird, have offered an additional $1 million to match congregational giving. All of your gifts are needed and appreciated, and if this congregation reaches the threshold of $10 per member, or however we count the souls we serve, our gift will be doubled. If you believe that our faith must become radically inclusive, justice-centered, multiracial, and multi-generational, then there is no better way to advance that vision than through your support for BLUU. The power and promise of Unitarian Universalism is waking up to meet fear and hate with radical imagination, transformative partnership, resilience, and joy. We make it possible through our commitment and our generosity. Thank you for your support. Our board here has decided that we will ask the congregation directly to donate to this call as their conscience allows. If we are able to reach the threshold of $10 per member, we can submit this, and then there'll be a matching grant that will match those funds. So, if you feel inclined to donate, please make checks payable to our church with a note in the line that says BLUU or Black Lives or Promise and Practice, whatever, some way that we know that this is the campaign it is meant to go to. If you're going to donate in cash, there's envelopes in the back. You can write on the front of it, this is for BLUU or whatever. Thank you for listening and considering a donation to this campaign. I have closing words. The first was submitted by Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson, who is at South Fork in Binghamton, New York, and these are the words of June Jordan in a poem for South African women, which she presented at the UN on August 9th in 1978. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We are not perfect, but we are perfectly fitted for this day. We are not without fault, but we can be honest to face our past as we chart a new future. We are the ones we have been waiting for. May we be bold and courageous to chart that new future. May we have faith in a future that is not known. We are the ones we have been waiting for. And the final closing words were submitted by Reverend Rebecca Savage, formerly Montgomery, and she is the full-time associate minister at the UU Congregation of Rockville, Maryland. She serves in the U.S. Army Reserve and is completing a doctorate in ministry at Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C. Spirit of life, spirit of love, we have gathered under the banner of a shared faith. We are born of a welcoming grace that extends and receives love. We're touched by the ways we have fallen short of who we strive to be. And we here, we reborn, forged by a greater courage. Let us move from this place encouraged and refreshed for the journey ahead.